You will never believe what I saw one very cold, dry November night. My family and I moved into a new house upon a hill on a little back road in the very small town of Fort Gay, West Virginia. Fort Gay sits right on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town then was probably just a couple thousand. My family and I were unpacking. We had not yet put the furniture in its rightful places, and everything was still in boxes. Overwhelmed with working all day, I retired around 11 p.m. I put my little brother on the couch, and I took his bed since my bed wasn't put together yet. His room faces the front of the house. His window is about 20 to 25 feet or so off the ground. I was looking out the window when I saw it. It stood nearly 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen. I had never been that scared in all my life. All I could do was lay there and just stare at this thing. It was sitting in a tree about 50 feet or so off the ground, about 50 feet from the house across the yard. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It had big, red, bright glowing eyes looking dead into my face. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and put my head under the covers, when all of a sudden, this thing smacked the window. I went through the house screaming, "There's something outside!" I was crying. My mom and dad looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you? It looks like you have seen a ghost." My face was snow white and I said, "I don't know what it was, but please, Daddy, don't go outside." I begged and begged. He came back in and said there was nothing out there. I kept screaming, saying, yes, there is." When I explained to them what I saw and how I felt, they said I was crazy, but to this day I will not go outside by myself. And even in the days, someone still has to walk me to my car. I have heard of something pretty crazy things going on up on that road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. My husband and I went to the theaters and watched Mothman Prophecies. I was reliving that night all over again. The way they described feeling and what they saw was remarkable. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I had saw. I believe in all my hearts of hearts I saw the Mothman. It's just a little weird. I only live about 80 miles south of Point Pleasant, where all that took place 37 years ago. It was exactly 32 years to the month when I saw it. There is a moment each leap year at exactly 3 minutes past 3 on the morning of February 29th. If you possess the courage, await that moment in a darkened room with no other present. At that moment, the darkness will deepen. If you were to hold your hand directly before your face, you would not see a thing. But you must not do so. No, for that would be to waste the moment. Instead, you must reach out into that impenetrable darkness, and it'll reach out to you. An unseen hand will grasp yours. You must not flinch away, nor tighten your grasp. To do so will only slow away more of the decrepit flesh that covers it, and anger its unseen owner. Remain perfectly still as the withered fingers move over your palm, tracing unknown patterns. Do not move an inch as it crawls slowly up your arm. And most of all, do not even breathe as it caresses your face, touching what cannot be seen. Should you remain still through this, the hand will be withdrawn and a voice will speak, so close you can feel its breath on your face. Smell the scent of decay it carries. It will ask you for one simple piece of information: your name. Answer truthfully. Answer truthfully, and the presence will retreat, leaving only a whisper in the air as the darkness lifts. It's done. From that day on, untold good fortune will be yours and mysterious power. You will lack nothing and have everything. But in a year, perhaps two, you will feel your skin begin to decay and smell the sweet smell of death upon your breath.
I never thought to share this story here, but a few months ago I posted about it briefly in another subreddit and everyone suggested I share it here also. Some of you may have seen it the last time I shared it. It was summer, I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who have driven across the entire state of Texas, you know that it is very long and very barren. Sometimes we'd go for hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than a rusty old gas station and a few dusty little houses. Looking out the window, you would swear you were just driving through the same 5 miles of desert again and again and again. I started getting a headache, and my husband suggested I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colors of the desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 p.m. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went to the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and the women's restrooms were down a little hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realized how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest of the 2 stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She didn't quite look homeless, but she was definitely messy looking. She had wild gray hair, almost shoulder length, sticking out every direction from her head. It looked like she hadn't seen a brush in weeks. She was wearing ragged-looking clothing, a pair of ill-fitting black workout shorts, and I remember noting her foam flip-flops. Several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind that this is Texas in July. The jacket was just hanging on her shoulders crooked, like she hadn't bothered to take a few more seconds to put it on correctly. She was carrying something in a tied-up plastic grocery bag. I gave a quick smile as our eyes met, and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes had a wild, alive look. She looked at me like she was hungry, and this was when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled toward me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as if she was ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face or trying to fix her mess of hair or even being washed. They were at her sides, elbows also slightly bent. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone behind. I shut and locked the stall door and took my time using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. The door was pretty heavy and had slammed the same way when I entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused, fingers only an inch from the lock. I stayed silent as I could manage to confirm what I had just thought I heard. Yes, breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. At this point I was scared and confused. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she left only to stick around and be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer, and this time it must have been at least 20 minutes. But I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from that she had positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, far enough that I couldn't see her feet. Finally, I heard her leave. This time I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway to the store. It was pitch black outside and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out at the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched right outside the front door was the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. My husband was waiting in the car and asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said I would tell him all about it once we were away from that store. The Redditors that I previously read about my experience had many theories, but the two most common were that she was a druggie who wanted to mug me, or that she worked with sex trafficking. I'm open to any of your theories. I tried to see if there was anything in the news from around that time, but I couldn't figure out exactly where we were when this happened.
When I was growing up, there was a girl in my neighborhood that was very, very strange. All of the other kids were freaked out by her. One day, she told all of the kids that in the forest behind her house, there was dead, bloody people. When they heard this, all the kids freaked out and told their parents. Their fathers had to go out and search the forest just in case. But all they found was candy wrappers and empty beer bottles. After that, all the kids in my neighborhood refused to go near her, including me. A few years later, my parents divorced. On the day the moving came to take my mom's things out of the house, the girl came up to me out of nowhere and told me that Matt didn't like that my parents were getting a divorce. I had no idea who Matt was. Even though I stopped being friends with her, my dad was still friends with her parents. My dad had told me that Matt was her imaginary friend. Her parents had told him all about the problems they were having. Matt was often too physical. They claimed that Matt could control the lights and could even make the power go out. They said Matt also knocked on doors at night, and if he was ignored, the banging on the doors would start. A few years later, my dad decided that he would invite the girl and her parents over to our house. I was begging my dad not to do this, but he said it would be nice to catch up with them. So when they came over that night, my dad told me to entertain the girl. I brought her up to my bedroom, and she seemed to be acting normal. She even told me how nice my room was. However, I was still creeped out by her. She just sat down in the middle of the floor while I tried to put a movie on the DVD player. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, in the most deadpan voice, she said, "Matt's here." And at that exact moment, the lights began to flicker on and off. I got so scared I ran out of my room, crying in fear. Her parents came running up the stairs, dragged their daughter out of my room, and took her home. For weeks afterwards, I refused to sleep in my bedroom. I haven't heard much from that family ever since then. But I have heard that Matt still controlled the lights, but I didn't know if he was really still around. To this day, whenever the lights begin to flicker or a bulb blows, it still freaks me out. In the summer of 2013, I found myself driving home alone on Highway 902 from a party. It was almost midnight, and needless to say, it was pitch black. As was usual at night, I was on the edge. I had the radio off and I could hear nothing but the muffled roar of tires on pavement and the dull hum of the engine. I stole a glance into the middle rear view mirror and saw nothing but darkness through the back window. I know that I looked backward and saw nothing. I'm sure of it. Just the seemingly endless blackness of the night. I remember it so clearly because not 10 seconds later a car passed me to the left, headlights on. I had one of those sudden adrenaline rushes, like when you think you see a person outside your bedroom window when it's just a tree, or when you're startled awake at night with the feeling of falling. 10 seconds earlier, nothing had been behind me. Suddenly, there was a car. I drove the rest of the way home, shivering and knowing something was off. The next morning, I found 2 sets of scratches near the back of my van. One was on the left rear and one was on the right. The car was pretty old. They could have been there for months, but that was the first time I distinctly remember seeing them. In hindsight, there are 2 possibilities for what happened that night. Possibility 1, by some glitch in reality or something paranormal, the other car somehow appeared behind me within 10 seconds of me checking my mirror, like some weird ghost crap or something. However, the second option is what makes my blood run cold whenever I consider it. It didn't even occur to me until months after the fact, but it did make me dread driving alone at night even more. Possibility 2. The car was normal. It had approached me from the rear and passed me to my left. However, something large and wide, and as black as the night, had been clinging to the rear of my car, obscuring my view through the window and leaving deep scratches on the side. And I had inadvertently driven it home with me. He sat on the porch swing on one of those bright blue and white winter mornings, sipping his first cup of coffee of the day, when he noticed the lump. It was pea-sized and just inside his right wrist, raised a little bit above the skin and slightly red. He poked at it, felt the fluid inside shift a bit, and the skin became shiny with tension. He thought he could feel something hard inside, a little note of flat firmness underneath the flesh. Bone, he thought, unalarmed, or cartilage. He sipped his coffee and looked out over the crystalline white yard, breath steaming, evergreens peeking through where snow had fallen off the branches. He absently scratched at the lump. He dug deeper with his fingernail. He could feel the outline of the object inside the lump. It seemed to recoil deeper into his arm at his probing. It had a sharp but smooth ridge, and was about a 1/4 inch long. Alarm woke in him, distant at first, then closing in as he continued to feel around the lump and explore it. The lump was familiar and alien at the same time. Him, but not him. He pressed harder and felt a slight pop as the fluid released and trickled down his forearm. As he did, he noted a new lump arise just inside his left wrist. A smaller one beside it. The recessed object now rose from the original lump like an undersea volcano, white and streaked with red, sharp and hard. A tooth. A canine tooth. In my arm. As the oddness of this registered, new lumps arose on his thighs, shoulder, and feet. He tried to shake the first tooth out of his arm, panic taking hold, and whispering in his ear like a lover, but all he succeeded in doing was to splatter blood out all over the pristine white yard, each droplet sinking in as it lost its warmth to the snow. Lumps erupted and swirled on his scalp and on his genitals. Teeth, legion in number, erupted from these newly formed lumps, sprouting up and moving centrally to line up, his navel at the center. His navel tore open, the lines radiating out to form a mouth in the middle of his abdomen. The pain was like fire. The sensation of tearing muscle, skin, was so unbearable he nearly swooned. He felt himself bent into an angle, his head forced into the mouth at his midsection by the drawn of this new opening. He felt the bone of his spine crack, realign and break as he doubled over. and up to his shoulders. Further he curled in. A thick slurping sound emanated from the mouth at his center. Tighter and tighter he went till his feet disappeared into the mouth. Like a reverse Cheshire cat, the mouth folded in on itself, emitting a final breath of the graveyard air into the chilly morning. Then it too was gone.